Number 5. The Anguished Man. The tale of this rather disturbing-looking painting is strange and steeped in mystery, but every scant piece of information we have on it is more unsettling than the last. The painting of a featureless man who seems to be screaming was apparently painted by a deeply troubled artist who mixed his own blood with his paints in an effort to get the right shade of red. Not long after completing it, the artist took his own life, and the painting found its way into a woman's care. She kept it for many years, but claimed that once she put the painting up, her and her family began to see a dark, shadowy figure roaming about their house. At night, they would hear strange sounds like footsteps and crying. The woman took the painting down and kept it locked in her attic for 25 years until she died, leaving the painting to its current caretaker, Sean Robinson. Sean had been warned by his grandmother that the painting was haunted, but he thought little of it. Robinson kept the painting in his basement for about a decade before rediscovering it and putting it up. Once again, the family began seeing the dark, shadowy figure roaming the halls and hearing the sound of weeping and moaning during the night. Sean began leaving a camera on by the painting to try and get evidence of its paranormal nature, and upon reviewing the footage, heard some odd noises and saw evidence of doors opening and closing seemingly by themselves, and the painting falling over onto the ground. As time went on, the activity became more and more intense, with his wife seeing a strange mist and an unseen force pushing his son down the stairs. Things went from bad to worse when guests who came to see the painting began reporting intense and sudden nosebleeds. Sean takes the painting out from time to time to show it to paranormal investigators and television programs who want to hear his story, but otherwise, the Anguished Man is apparently kept locked away in a safe location to prevent any further harm from coming to unwitting people. Number 4. Robert the Evil Doll. We've all heard of the cursed Annabelle doll that has permeated pop culture for the last decade, but have you heard of Robert? Robert was a gift to a young boy of the same name, Robert Eugene Otto, from his grandfather. The grandfather had been traveling in Germany and came across the doll who was not intended to be a toy, but a window display. He bought the doll for his grandson, who dressed it in a sailor's outfit that he had outgrown, and kept it with him at almost all times. As the young boy grew up, witnesses remember his relationship with the doll seemed to grow more and more unhealthy, with him referring to the doll as a living person and blaming mishaps on him. The boy, who went by his middle name, Gene, grew up to be an eccentric artist in a stately home known as the Artist's House. He kept Robert by the upstairs window, where children claimed to see him moving in and out of view. When Gene died in 1974, the new owner of the house, Myrtle Reuter, found the doll and became its new owner. Visitors of the house began reporting the sound of giggling and footsteps coming from the attic where the doll was being kept. When the doll was around people who spoke ill of its original owner, some claim that his facial expression seemed to change. After Myrtle got sick of the doll apparently moving around the home by itself and scaring guests for 20 years, she chose to donate Robert to the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida. Robert now resides in a locked display case to prevent the over 120-year-old doll from decaying further, but also to protect the visitors of the museum. But even those precautions don't seem to always work. Guests who insult Robert at the museum report experiencing tragedies in their lives not long after. This has ranged from people losing their jobs, getting divorced, breaking bones, getting into automobile accidents, and even a few deaths. The doll reportedly receives letters every day from admirers, people wanting the doll to curse their enemies, and a few from people asking Robert to reverse the curse they believe he has laid upon them. Number 3. The Women from Lem statue. This limestone statue, also known as the Goddess of Death, was discovered in Lem, Cyprus in 1878. Its purpose, or exactly what it was meant to portray, has been lost to time, but many experts believe it may be a fertility statue of an unknown goddess. Whatever the reason for the carving, experts have concluded that it was carved sometime around 3500 BC. After being found in 1878, it was purchased by a man named Lord Elfont. Within 6 years of having acquired the object, Elfont and all 6 of his family members had died under mysterious circumstances. The statue passed to a man named Ivor Manucci, who died along with his entire family within 4 years of the purchase. The same thing happened to its next owner, Lord Thompson Noel, and his family. The statue seemed to disappear for a time before being acquired by Sir Alan Biverbrook, who had a wife, 2 daughters, and 2 sons. Yet again, family members began to drop like flies, with Biverbrook, his daughters, and his wife all passing within a few years. Fearing that they would be next, Biverbrook's sons decided to donate the statue to the Royal Museum in Edinburgh, Scotland, where it was soon put on display. However, the statue was not quite done, and the curator who had handled the statue mysteriously died the next year. The statue is still on display to this day, locked in a heavy glass display case. Number 2. Thomas Busby's chair. Our next entry takes us to North Yorkshire in 1702, when 2 criminals, Daniel Oddie and his son-in-law, Thomas Busby, came into conflict. They were coin forgers who essentially ran a criminal empire, but Daniel disapproved of Tom's relationship with his daughter. This resulted in a fight, which ended with Daniel's untimely demise. Thomas was arrested soon afterwards and sentenced to be. There is some variation in what happened next. Some versions of the tale say that Thomas was arrested at his favorite pub, and others say he was allowed back into the bar for his last drink before his death. Whatever the case, before being taken away, he told the other patrons of the pub, "May sudden death come to anyone who dare sit in my chair." He was then taken away and as the local historian and poet William Grange described it, the bones of the poor wretch who had committed murder to fester in the sunshine and blow in the tempest until they fell piecemeal to earth, and tradition yet tells tales of night wanderers being terrified when passing the dreaded spot. While Thomas began apparently haunting the spot across from the inn where his remains were displayed, the curse he laid on the chair began taking effect. Over the years, many brave souls sat on the chair to prove they were not afraid and paid the price. In 1894, a chimney sweep sat in the chair and was found the next day hanging next to where Busby had been displayed. In 1967, 2 Air Force pilots sat in the chair as a joke, but when they were driving home that night, they crashed into a tree and did not survive. A few years later, a builder sat in the chair and fell off a roof later that same night. Not long after, a cleaner fell into the chair after slipping while mopping the floor and died of a brain tumor soon after. In 1978, the owner of the now renamed Busby Stoop Inn decided that too many deaths had occurred and donated the chair to the Thirsk Museum. Although they didn't technically lock the chair away, they did hang the chair on the wall, 5 feet off the ground, to prevent anyone from sitting on it and receiving Busby's fatal curse. Number 1. The Bassano Vase. Although it has fallen out of favor now, for centuries, a common gift given to brides on the day of their weddings were intricate ornate vases. Our next tale begins in the 15th century Italy and spans over 500 years. Legend says that on the day of her wedding, a bride in a village near Napoli found a gift with no clue which of the guests had given it to her. It was a 4-pound silver vase. She decided to put it in her room for safekeeping before the wedding ceremony, but when the ceremony was due to start, the bride was nowhere to be found. The groom went to her room to look for her and found her lifeless body on the ground, with no trace of what had caused the death, other than her desperately clutching the silver vase. The bride was buried, and the vase was passed on to one of her family members to be taken care of. Within days, the second member of the family was dead from unknown causes. The vase was given to another member of the family, and when he also passed away, the family made the connection between all the recent tragedies and the Bassano vase. Unsure what to do, they reached out to a local priest who, upon hearing the story, informed them that whoever had given it to the bride had either cursed it or made it from cursed materials. He advised them to bury it on sacred grounds. They dug a hole and wrote a note warning, "Beware. This vase brings death," which they placed inside the cursed vase. The vase was buried and remained underground for the next 500 years. By horrible chance, a man in 1988 was digging and came across the vase. He read the note, but being the skeptical type, discarded it and took the newly found Bassano vase to a local auction house. The vase went up for auction and was sold for the equivalent of $2,270 to the local pharmacist. Within 3 months, the pharmacist was dead, and the vase was sold by his family to a local doctor, who also passed passed away soon after. The vase developed a reputation after this, and several people who were approached to purchase it refused, but it was eventually bought by an archaeologist who, despite his family's protests, did not believe in curses. He died 3 months later. His family threw the vase out their window, but a police officer who was passing by saw this and tried to return it. The family refused the vase back and told him of its cursed nature. He tried to give it to multiple different museums, but having heard about the curse, they all refused. Fearing for his life, he did what the bride's family had done over 500 years prior and buried it in a lead box in a cemetery. Which cemetery he used is unknown, but let us hope that no unwitting soul rediscovers this cursed vase and unleashes it upon humanity once again.
Number 5 on this list is Robert the Doll. Robert the Doll is one of the most haunted and cursed dolls on the entire planet. Ghosts and Gravestones says the story of Robert the Doll dates back to the early 1900s when a young boy named Eugene Robert Otto was given a one-of-a-kind handmade doll by a servant that worked for his parents in his home. Eugene, who everybody called Gene, named the doll Robert and quickly became attached to his new friend. The home where Eugene lived, now called the Artist's House, is located at 534 Eaton Street and was built between 1890 and 1898. It was here that Eugene was given Robert the doll and where a friendship that lasted throughout his lifetime and beyond was forged. While he seemed like an ordinary cloth doll, it wasn't long before Robert was involved in strange and somewhat terrifying events. The first hint that something out of the ordinary was happening was one night when Gene, who was only 10 years old, awoke to find Robert the doll sitting at the end of his bed, staring at him. Moments later, his mother was awakened by his screams for help and the sounds of furniture being overturned in her son's bedroom. Gene cried for help, begging his mother to rescue him. When she was finally able to wrench the locked door open, she saw poor Gene curled up in fear on his bed, his room in shambles, and Robert the doll sitting at the foot of the bed. And all the child could say was Robert did it. Now, this was the first instance where Robert was acting up, but there have been tons of experiences since then where this doll is just doing things that really shouldn't be doing. He now lives in East Martello where visitors flock to see him, although it's a bad idea. There are letters and notes all around Robert from people that have come to see him, all begging for Robert's forgiveness. Apparently, taking a picture of Robert without his permission will cause him to start to haunt you. This curse has affected hundreds to thousands of people, and they all usually end up coming back to Robert begging for freedom from this curse. At this point, paranormal investigators have learned that messing with Robert really isn't the best idea, and just leaving this doll alone, probably the smartest thing to do. Number 4 on this list is the Screaming Skull. Last I checked, if there is no meat on the bone, then a skull shouldn't be screaming. That's kind of what's going down with this one extremely haunted skull in Burton Agnes Hall, England. Instablog says, what if you touch an object and then you hear terrible, deafening screams? That is precisely what happens when you touch this skull at an Elizabethan manor in England. Burton Agnes Hall is the house of Catherine Ann Griffith, who was brutally murdered by numerous bullies in 1620. Her skull still rests inside the house. Why? Because whenever somebody tried to take it out of the house, what happened next terrified them to the bone. People who have tried to touch or disturb that skull have reported seeing a scary ghost walk in and utter a deafening scream. This scared the people so much that they actually ran out of the house in terror. If you're up for a scary challenge, then this might be your chance to prove your mettle to the world, but for the weak-hearted ones, it's wise to stay away. And yeah, guys, I mean, I agree with that article right there. Probably best not to mess with this thing. I mean, a bunch of paranormal investigators won't even go here anymore. If a bunch of paranormal investigators think that this area is too scary for them, then sorry guys, I'm tapping out. It's way too scary for me too. Number 3 on this list is the Maori warrior masks. Now, these warrior masks hold a curse that won't affect everyone, just a small portion of people. Specifically, women who are soon to be expecting children. The Occult Museum says New Zealand's Maori warriors are part of an ancient tribe who would carve unique masks when it was time for battle. When a man died in the mask, it was believed that his soul would remain trapped in the mask they were wearing. Although their mythology does not dictate that any harm is done by the trapped souls, the presence of the masks has a strange and sometimes fatal effect on pregnant women. Women who are expecting often experience complications when they come in contact with the masks. It's unknown why this phenomenon occurs, but the museum that holds the remaining masks posts a warning that pregnant women should stay away. The literal museum is out here warning pregnant women not to come. That's how you know that this thing's seriously dangerous. Like whenever a business or enterprise does something that's actually gonna lose them money, that's when you have my attention. Considering they just lost an entire demographic of people, I'm now listening and buying into this curse. The paranormal investigators who aren't pregnant have taken a look at this, and they're having a hard time getting to the bottom of it. Some people have suggested that the Maori tribe thought that pregnant women were taboo, but that also doesn't really make any sense, because then how would they have repopulated their tribe? Regardless of why it is the way that it is, just know that if you are expecting, that's not the right time to take a look at these masks. Number 2 on this list is the Surrey Ghost Car. So this is a weird one and definitely something that paranormal investigators are a bit spooked by. List 25 says crashes are common on the A3 highway in England, so it looked like a routine matter when police in Surrey received calls that a car had veered off the A3 with its headlights blazing. But when officers went to investigate, they found no signs of the reported vehicle. However, a further search revealed chilling results. Just 60 feet from the reported crash scene, and buried in twisted undergrowth, was the remains of a wrecked car containing a decomposing body of a young man who, as the police estimated, had crashed there 5 months earlier. Therefore, what the witnesses reported might have been a ghostly apparition of the original car. Now, how on earth does that make any sense at all? You know what, let me answer that for you. It doesn't. First off, how did no one notice this car earlier? And then, what was that ghostly apparition that had a car veer off the road? Paranormal investigators are all scared of this one because who knows what type of effect this ghost car could have on your vehicle. And finally, number 1 on this list is the cursed mirror. This mirror isn't just cursed with a bad reflection, it's gonna show you something a lot worse than just you with a little bedhead or something. Instablog says, if you've seen Oculus, then chances are already you're scared of mirrors. And let's not even go back to the time when Bloody Mary was a whole thing. But if these creepy images of mirrors in the horror genre weren't enough, here's a real object which is most likely cursed. In St. Francisville, Louisiana, there's a plantation house which is one of the most haunted houses in America. Inside the house is this mirror, a cursed mirror. Legend goes that the plantation slave brutally killed the owner of the house, named Sarah Woodruff, and her daughters inside the house. Ever since then, they remain trapped inside the mirror. Visitors often report sights of handprints on the mirror, along with some unexplainable strange marks. And the classic haunting is also rumored, figures dressed in white, old-fashioned attire, visible on the other side of the mirror. Some people who have been exposed to this mirror for longer than they should say that these figures in white follow them around too, that they've even seen them appear in other mirrors outside of the plantation, and 1 or 2 of them have talked about how they've seen them outside of a mirror entirely, as if they were standing like right in front of them. It seems like the longer that you're exposed to this, the more of an impact the curse will have on you. Kind of like, I don't know, radiation poisoning or something like that, where the time you spend among the toxin, that's gonna hurt you more. Obviously, because of this, paranormal investigators don't want to spend too long investigating this mirror. A short stint doing some research probably won't hurt you, although it will definitely give you a scare considering you're gonna see the figures on the other side. But extended exposure is where the real danger lies with this cursed item. Number 5 on this list is the die book box. This is an evil box that tormented many people and even claimed some lives along the way. Zack Baggins writes, according to Jewish folklore, a diabook is a dark spirit that takes over the bodies of living people and uses them for evil. Legend has it that a diabook can be trapped inside of a box and prevented from causing mischief unless the box is opened, that is. Several years ago, the diabook box came up for sale on eBay. The seller listed a vintage wine cabinet that came from the estate of a woman who survived a World War II concentration camp. The seller, an antique dealer named Kevin Mannis, claimed that the first owner's granddaughter was terrified of the box, warning him that her grandmother said it held a diabook. After buying the cabinet, he was plagued by a series of unfortunate events and recurring nightmares of an old hag that would brutally attack him, causing him to wake up with bruises on his body. He also experienced an overpowering stench of cat urine in his home. Tragically, his mother suffered a stroke while opening the box. Not surprisingly, he decided to get rid of it. The box eventually ended up in the hands of Missouri Medical Museum director Jason Haxton, who was skeptical about the powers attributed to the box. He soon changed his mind. After acquiring the box, he began to experience a series of medical maladies, including bleeding eyes and strange rashes. He also began to dream of being attacked by an old hag and would also awake with bruises on his body. Kevin Mannis told me that while the box was in Haxton's basement, a man died there and his body was found lying next to the box. He eventually became so unnerved by the box that he reached out to scientists and rabbis who instructed him to build a wooden ark lined with 24 karat gold, place the box inside, and bury it in the ground. Now, this actually wasn't the end of the story for this box. The box was eventually dug up again and then later donated to a museum. This was after it had tormented a few more people, mind you, though. Now it's fully encased in a glass covering, but even that doesn't stop the evil spirit from coming after people. Many people who have visited this box have reported having serious episodes in the room while they're looking at it. Whatever spirit is trapped inside this box, it is clearly an extremely powerful one. The box remains on display at the museum, but I wouldn't recommend going to check it out if I was you. Number 4 on this list is the Devil's Rocking Chair. The Devil's Rocking Chair is actually from one of Ed and Lorraine Warren's most famous case, The Devil Made Me Do It. Zack Baggins writes, the horror began in July 1980 when David Glatzel, 11 years old, became possessed by a demon. One night he woke up screaming, claiming that he had been visited by a man with big black eyes, a thin face with animal features, jagged teeth, pointed ears, horns, and hooves. David was, everyone agreed, not the kind of kid who liked scary movies or who was likely to make things up, and he was visibly shaken up by this experience. He became rather withdrawn and quiet. His older sister, Debbie, asked her fiancé, Arn Johnson, if he would stay with her family for a while and see whether it would help David get out of his depression. Arn, of course, agreed, but things didn't get better. David reported having more nightmares about the terrifying man who promised to take his soul. Odd scratches and bruises began to appear on the boy, and all the injuries seemed to happen while he was asleep. Odd sounds, which Arn couldn't explain, were heard in the attic. Worst of all, David began to claim that he was now seeing the beast while he was awake. He was always seen sitting in the family's rocking chair, which the beast now claimed as his own. David was the only one who saw the beast in the chair, but family members often saw it rocking back and forth, seemingly under its own power. This was obviously a lot, so the Warrens were brought in to perform the exorcism. The exorcism took place in that rocking chair, and it's thought that the chair itself still has some evil energy from this spirit attached to it. Now the chair resides at the Haunted Museum, but owner Zack Baggins actually took the exhibit down because the chair was simply too dangerous, he thought. Number 3 on this list is the Hope Diamond. Don't get me wrong, guys, I would love to have this thing, but I just don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze here. Google Arts and Culture says, one of the most famous diamonds in the world, the Hope Diamond, originated in the Kolar mine in Andhra Pradesh, India. According to legend, the stone is cursed and brings misfortune to anyone who owns it. The curse is said to have come about when the original diamond was stolen from the eye of a statue. The thief met a grisly end, kick-starting a pattern of misfortune for all those who possessed the diamond. Over the years, owners of the Hope Diamond have befallen fates including death by murder, execution, They've taken their own lives, bankruptcy, and imprisonment. Thankfully, the curse seems to have been lifted when the diamond was donated to the Smithsonian in 1958. Now, I don't really buy into the fact that this curse is lifted, in my opinion. Like, literally, if you own this diamond, then you die or someone you love dies. That's what's happened throughout history. In the best possible case scenario, you just get hit with like horrible luck and lose all your money or some other horrible thing. There just really isn't any good way to spin this. Owning the Hope Diamond is pretty much a horrible idea. Number 2 on this list is the unlucky mummy. Do not get on a boat if said boat is also carrying this mummy. Google Arts and Culture says the unlucky mummy isn't actually a mummy, but the mummy board or coffin lid of a high status woman who lived in around 950 to 900 BCE. Discovered in Thebes in the 1800s, the 4 young Englishmen who first purchased the mummy all died in unfortunate circumstances. Rumors of the curse soon spread, and in the early 20th century, journalist William Thomas Stead wrote an article on the jinxed artifact. Stead went on to be one of the passengers on the doomed Titanic. It's said that he told stories of the curse in the run-up to the disaster, with many believing that the mummy itself caused the ship's watery end. Today, the unlucky mummy is on display in the British Museum. The Titanic was supposed to be unsinkable. Enter in the unlucky mummy and boom, now the unsinkable ship goes down. Maybe it's a stretch to say that this thing caused the literal Titanic crash, but I can at least guarantee that it probably didn't help. At least this thing is now locked up in a museum very much on land and not connected to any boats that I know of. And number 1 on this list is the Hands Resist Him painting. I'm all about having some cool, groundbreaking art, but this painting definitely crosses the line. The lineup says there is no doubt the painting is disturbing. It shows a young boy standing next to a girl doll with hollow eyes and a sad, downturned mouth. The doll is holding a strange device with wires coming out of it. The eeriest part of the painting are the many disembodied children's hands reaching toward the boy through the glass panels of a door just behind him. But even more disturbing than the painting itself are the stories of what has happened to people who come in contact with it. A few years after the painting was sold, the art critic Henry Seldis died. Then the gallery owner died. Then in 1984, John Marley died. The painting disappeared, not surfacing again until 2000 in a bizarre posting on eBay. The new owners were trying to sell it because they said it was haunted. They claimed the boy and the doll in the picture would fight with each other during the night, terrifying their 4-year-old daughter. They set up a motion sensing camera in the room for 3 nights and claimed they had captured the boy in the picture leaving the frame and coming into the room, apparently fleeing in terror. The literal kid in the painting is leaving. Not freaking cool, guys. My paintings are supposed to be static and not moving, and they definitely aren't supposed to be walking around my home scaring the living bejesus out of me and my family. Apparently, this painting is locked up in a storage locker now, and no one is allowed to see it.
Number 5. The Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult. Owned by a couple, Dana and Greg Newkirk, who realized one day that they had a passion for the paranormal and a collection worth boasting about, they opened a museum with the intention of getting people to experience the paranormal as close as they could. The thinking being that we don't usually get to experience it up close, this museum provides a one-of-a-kind horror experience. Some of the gems of the collection include a piece of the real-life Amityville horror house, the infamous haunting, or how about the Catskills crone, a terrifying hand-carved idol of a human with nails jammed into the eyes, allegedly tied to a supernatural entity called the crone. The Restless painting, a cursed painting notorious for flinging itself across rooms, or if that's all not enough for you, perhaps the terrifying begging bowl, an ancient Tibetan offering made out of a human skull, designed for rituals where the offerer would feed the skull wine, bread, and blood in exchange to temper the raging spirits of demons for good fortune. Now, there's no question the Traveling Museum is one of the most unique collections on the planet, and lucky for you, it's always moving. But if you're looking for good scares, you don't need to travel anywhere, because you already know the best scares are coming to you twice a day, every day at Top 5 Scary. Stay subscribed and stay scared. Number 4. Zafis Museum of the Paranormal. Now for most of us, we probably wouldn't think of mixing cursed items in with the decor. I wouldn't want to bring that dark energy home with me. I get enough bad vibes as it is. Well, for John Zafis, he welcomes it with open arms. What kind of person would want to do that? Well, if I told you that Zafis was the nephew of Ed and Lorraine Warren, would it make a bit more sense? Feeling inspired by his aunt and uncle, Zafis too became a collector of the paranormal and an investigator of the unknown. Must run in the family. He worked alongside his aunt and uncle on several of their cases where he was tutored by them in the ways of the paranormal, leading him to become a respected hunter in his own right. Following in their footsteps, he opened his own museum of his own demonic relics. His collection includes souvenirs from the cases he's worked on in the past, much like his relatives. Some highlights of the collection include a black cast iron human skull that was discovered inside an unnamed political family's house, a black idol that was used for satanic rituals, a sword that was apparently used to conjure black magic, and a whole lot more. Now don't worry, everything Zafi's taken in is safe, it's been cleansed, and he's very careful with his vetting process. Apparently anything too cursed for him to feel safe bringing into the museum, he throws into a body of water. So just be careful swimming around the museum, I suppose. Now the museum is currently closed, but Zafis is searching for a new location to open up again soon. Hopefully somewhere with some nice thick walls. Keep all that evil energy in check. Number 3. The Museum of Death. Well, that's a cheery name, isn't it? You have to imagine with a name like the Museum of Death, there's something suspicious going on. Nope, not particularly. It's owned by a very cheery couple who built it in 1995 in the city's first mortuary. Their intended mission is to make people happy to be alive, which actually is very terrifying and ominous in a sort of Jigsaw, cherish your life sort of way. It's intended as a commemoration of life, just with a heavy focus on the last stage of life. It serves as a grim look at death, although the owners insist they don't want to scare anyone, but they're not trying to sanitize death either. Instead, they choose to show the reality of it, all the grisly details and all. As such, the museum is a site of controversy for quite some time, as some people find the exhibits a bit extreme. Some people go so far as to say it's tasteless, with footage of autopsies being shown and a collection of all sorts of relics from some of the evilest of evil criminals, Jeffrey Dahmer to name one. The museum boasts an impressive collection of bones, skulls, coffins, ancient morticians' tools and execution equipment, and all manner of macabre curios guaranteed to leave you feeling uneasy. Now it should be noted, the museum is absolutely not at all for those with a squeamish stomach, and really should be reserved for those with a real dark interest in the dead. Number 2. Ed and Lorraine's Occult Museum. Now, it's hard to talk about a list of cursed museums full of the devil's objects without mentioning the Warrens' legendary Museum of the Paranormal. It almost goes without saying. It's probably one of the most famous haunted collections on the globe. Ed and Lorraine were storied demonologists, and the chances are extremely good. If you've even seen 2 videos by us, you've probably heard about them a million times. But it's still one of the coolest museums of cursed objects on the planet and is packed to the gills. It would be just wrong to leave it out of this list. Although the pair have since passed a while ago, the museum is now upheld by their son-in-law, Tony Spera, who carries on the mantle for them. The museum sits in a large shed just outside the Warrens' former property. I guess it's best to keep the evil close to home. The museum houses all sorts of dark souvenirs from the Warrens' storied past and is a veritable who's who for Conjuring and Warren fans. You can get a chance to get up close and personal with the real Annabelle, snap a selfie with her if you dare, or take a look at the cursed shadow doll made of real human teeth and bird feathers, or perhaps a satanic idol retrieved from the woods that caused Lorraine to become violently ill when brought in. If the Warrens were on the case, then they've brought something back sitting on that shelf. Mr. Spera blesses everyone who visits the museum before entry, just in case there's any residual evil hanging around in the air you might be bringing in. A priest comes by too to bless all the items, keep them safe. The museum is currently closed to visitors, but Spera is working hard to have this piece of paranormal legacy reopened once again. Number 1, Zack Baggins' Haunted Museum. Now if you're looking for the cream of the crop, if you're looking for the peak of the haunted museum circuit, well, then no one has worked harder for that distinction than Zack Baggins, the esteemed paranormal investigator investigator and ghost adventure star. Zack's collection started when he was a young boy, when he would scour garage sales with his mom in hopes of finding strange occult objects. I wonder how often he was finding occult objects at garage sales. Since then, a lifelong obsession would eventually turn into one of the most impressive hoards of spooky finds under the sun. The museum is in Las Vegas, built on a property in 1938 that has been said to be home to dark spirits who pass there, and their energy remains behind. Before becoming a museum, it's rumored that it used to be home to secret orders that would perform dark rituals. Among some of Zack's more treasured haunted items are the Dybbuk box, a wine rack said to be home to the world's most malevolent poltergeist, a possessed rocking chair from the famous Glatzel case, inspiring The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, and tons of relics from the world's most sinister criminals like Ed Gein or Ted Bundy. Now, it goes without saying that a building replete with haunted items is a melting pot for spirits and haunting sightings. The tour warns you and asks you to sign a waiver before entering that you're knowingly putting yourself at risk of endangerment from unknown forces. Now, staff at the museum have reported everything from seeing strange lights, shadows, hearing peculiar noises, feeling unwell around certain objects, all the way to real extremes like seeing mysterious figures and cloaked, robed people at night. If you're feeling up for it and you want to feel like a paranormal investigator yourself, the museum also offers solo tours at night with nothing but a flashlight to guide you. Just be aware of what you're going up against.